Alright, if you're here, you made the right choice. I will be speaking on the history and definition of survey for all you curious folks. Well, surveying is not exactly the most exciting topic, but trust me, it's more interesting than you think. We're going way back in time, to a world without fancy GPS or lasers. People had to use pure skill and smarts to figure out where stuff was. Let's jump into this journey together and see how we got to where we are today. We won't know the history of surveying if we don't know what surveying is, right? Surveying or land surveying is the technique, profession, art, and science of determining the terrestrial two-dimensional or three-dimensional positions of points and the distances and angles between them. According to Wikipedia though. Yeah, a bit confusing? Let's go with this instead. Surveying is like taking a really detailed picture of the Earth. Instead of using a camera, surveyors use special tools and math to figure out exactly where things are and how they relate to each other. They map out the land, make sure things are the right shape and size, and help us understand our world better. The history of surveying dates back to ancient civilizations like Egypt and Rome. The Egyptians used simple geometry to re-establish land boundaries after the Nile River floods, while the Romans employed professional land surveyors to divide their empire. Well, you see, long ago, the Nile River used to flood every year. The river would rise and rise, spilling over its banks and covering the land with water. This flooding was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing being that the floodwaters carried rich soil that made the land very fertile for farming, and the water from the flood helped farmers grow their crops. But in the case of the curse, the floods could damage houses and other buildings, and sometimes, people and animals could be lost in the floods. Despite the dangers, the people who lived near the river learned to live with the floods. They built their homes on higher ground and developed ways to protect their crops. The annual flooding was a part of their lives, shaping their culture and way of life, but that's a story for another time. Okay, so back then, the ancient Egyptians were basically the surveying bosses. They figured out how to use the stars and some simple tools to build mind-blowing stuff. In ancient Egypt, a rope stretcher was a surveyor who measured land and property boundaries using knotted cords. They were skilled in using rope and knots to create precise measurements and right angles. Their techniques were crucial for maintaining accurate land records and constructing large-scale structures like pyramids and temples. The Nile would flood and basically erase all the property lines, so they had to have surveyors who could figure out where those lines were supposed to be. Because of this, they got really good at measuring stuff and keeping things straight. Later on, the Romans took surveying to a whole new level. They built huge roads, bridges, and aqueducts all across their empire. To do that, they needed incredibly detailed maps and careful measurements. They even had a special tool called a grommer, which helped them make perfect right angles. After the Roman Empire fell, surveying kind of went downhill for a while, but then, when people started exploring faraway places, they needed better maps and ways to navigate. That led to some big improvements in surveying tools and techniques. Monks were some of the first people to start carefully mapping out the land, and they used surveying to design and build those beautiful cathedrals. Those medieval monks were some of the first serious mapmakers. They had to figure out where to put their monasteries and how big the surrounding lands were, so they got really good at measuring stuff and keeping detailed records. Alright, so these monks started using some simple tools, like those magnetic compasses that had just been invented. They'd also use a measuring stick called a rod to figure out distances. And they'd sometimes use the shadows of sticks or poles to measure angles, kind of like how sundials work. So the 18th century was a pretty big deal for surveying. They started using those newfangled theodolites more, which made things a lot more accurate. Plus, they started using triangulation more, which is where you measure angles between points to figure out distances. This was a game changer for making really big maps. Later on, in the 19th century, we had big projects like the Great Trigonometric Survey of India, which mapped out a huge part of Asia with incredible accuracy. They started using these cool new theodolites that were way more precise than anything that came before. Plus, they figured out how to connect those theodolites to telescopes, so they could measure things that were really far away. This opened up all sorts of possibilities for big projects, like mapping entire countries. Over time, surveying techniques evolved. The invention of the theodolite in the 18th century revolutionized precision and accuracy. In the 20th century, advancements in technology, such as the development of GPS, further transformed the field. Today, surveying plays a vital role in various fields, including civil engineering, construction, and GIS. It helps in planning, designing, and monitoring infrastructure projects, ensuring accuracy and efficiency. We will be launching our website soon where we will dive deeper into the history of surveying. Subscribe for more information. Thank you very much for your time.